Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Deliver Digital Success with High Performance EUC on HCI and GPU. In essence, you'll learn how hyperconvergence and GPUs make your digital workspace perform. Today's event is brought to you by Nutanix and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is David Davis, and I'm excited to be your moderator for today's event. Now, before I introduce today's speakers, I want to briefly do a little bit of housekeeping here. First off, we want this to be a very educational event. So if you have questions about hyperconvergence, GPUs, end user computing, VDI, and how all this could fit together in your data center, please use the GoToWebinar questions box there, and we have experts from Nutanix standing by to answer all of your questions. We will be doing a dedicated Q&A session at the end of today's event, but don't wait to enter your questions till then. Feel free to enter your questions throughout the event, and we'll be answering them as they come in. At the end of today's event, after the Q&A session, we will be giving away a $300 Tango gift card. I'll announce the name of the prize winner then, and keep in mind that that giveaway is only eligible for attendees who are live on today's event. If you're watching this event on demand, recorded, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. For the full prize, terms, and conditions, you can visit our website, events.actualtechmedia.com. I also want to call your attention to the handouts section of the GoToWebinar control panel because we have a number of handouts available for you to download. If you click on those handouts, you can easily download those PDFs. Those are recommended resources from today's presenters, so make sure that you download those and share them with your friends and colleagues. Today's presenters are Mr. Kong Yang, Senior Solutions Marketing Manager at Nutanix, Mr. Case Baggerman, Technical Director of Engineering at Nutanix, Mr. Jarian Gibson, Senior Solutions Architect at Nutanix, and Mr. Brian Sir, Principal Technical Marketing Engineer at Nutanix. We're going to have some great conversation on today's event. We're going to help educate you on VDI, EUC, hyperconvergence, and GPUs. You'll learn how all these pieces fit together on today's special event. And with that, let's kick off today's webinar on delivering digital success with high performance EUC on HCI with GPUs. I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Case Baggerman. Case, take it away.
Thank you, David. Let me first, before we start off with explaining the agenda, let me talk about me and our team, what we do for Nutanix, and how we got to this webinar. So myself, Jarian Gibson, and myself, we're part of the Performance Solution Engineering team. Brian Sir is also on this webinar, is part of our Technical Marketing Engineering team. We always see him as our adopted teamie because he does a lot of work for the Performance Solution Engineering team, and we leverage his skill set a lot. So if you look at the Performance Solution Engineering team, there are three major pillars where we help out. First of all is creating collateral. So we write our reference architectures, best practice guides, solution notes. And with writing those reference architectures, we do a lot of benchmarking and testing of our product. So that means that we try to push our product as far as we can go. And sometimes we push it over the limits. And that's the moment where we take that information, we take those tests, we take the results, go back to engineering and see if we can improve the product. So that's the second pillar. And the third one is reducing sales friction, which means that we'll help our sales teams, our field teams, with either large or very complex deals with our customers to get them to implement Nutanix in the best possible way. So that's about the Performance Solution Engineering team. Let's look at today's agenda. So we've got two major items we're going to talk about. One is high performance end user computing on hyperconverged infrastructure with GPUs. We'll talk about trends and an overview. And moving from that, we'll talk about why, when, and how to leverage NVIDIA Grid for end user computing. So those are the two items we have on the agenda today. And let's move forward to talking about why performance is key to end user computing success. Brian, would you take the honors and talk a little bit about why performance is key to end user computing success?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the key because it's the piece where the customer, which is your end user, will ultimately know whether they're having a good experience or not. So Whereas an application or something you might not immediately know, but if your desktop is slow, you're going to get complaints about your end user computing. And there's a lot of things that play into that, right? There's the underlying performance of the storage, there's networking, and we really focus on kind of a few key buckets, right? You have CPU, you have memory, storage capacity, and storage performance, which really comes down to the latency of the storage.
So, Brian, I'm curious, why is it that storage plays such a key role in the success of an EUC project? I mean, I've heard of EUC projects that have failed because just the storage wasn't good enough. Why is storage such a critical piece of that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say probably all four of those metrics are pretty equally important, but storage, in a sense, we're less worried about the, capacity, right? Because you either get the capacity right or not, in meaning that you have enough or you don't. But the performance piece is something that, it's important because if your latency is up on storage, then you get a bad user experience. It's really kind of that cut and dry. And it's not only important to have it right at the beginning, like if you start small and then scale, a lot of people can potentially get it right at the beginning, but as they scale their deployment, they add additional users. Eventually, at some point, if it's not right, you're going to hit that brick wall and start to have bad performance. So that's why it's really critical there.
Also, if you look at traditional infrastructures and basically the legacy of end user computing, if we look back, I'm not sure about you guys, Jarian and Brian, but when I was back in the field working as a solution architect for a system integrator, I gathered requirements and often I had to deal with multiple teams, so the desktop team or a Windows team, networking team, also a storage team. And I can't even count the number of times where I came up to the storage teams with my requirements in terms of network capacity and I/O and latency. And they would look at me if I was a madman because I had such high requirements of their storage that they couldn't even deliver those requirements. Now, if we fast forward a few years with modern days architectures, with hyperconverged, and especially Nutanix with the concept of data locality when it comes down to desktop virtualization or application delivery, it's something that, as Brian already tried to say, is that we're taking latency and storage out of that equation. So that the key metrics, they're still there, they're still important. But what we've seen with the hyperconverged and specifically to Nutanix is that we're taking away the complexity of sizing storage in terms of pure performance. So we can deliver that I/O versus a very low latency, which equals to a great performance on the end user desktop. And we can focus on things like RAM and CPU. And I know that Jarian Gibson has been involved with a lot of sizing questions from the field, from customers. Maybe, Jarian, you can chime in on the CPU and RAM perspective and how we can help our customers sizing the right environment for them.
Before I get into that, just adding to what you said about, being in the field and talking to older storage teams, legacy architecture, and how a lot of them would like to size things up front. So like to size that traditional 3-tier architecture for their end goal in the beginning. And then sometimes, like both Brian said as well, when you get to a certain point, that performance is not there. So, another thing with, hyperconverged infrastructure or, what Nutanix does is that we can build in blocks, build for what you need now, get that performance. And as you grow, add more of those building blocks and still have the same performance that you started with, where in the legacy or 3-tier architectures, where when you get to a certain point, that may tip over and you may have user experience issues.
And I'm curious, both of you talked about, tools and sizing the environment. What sort of tools are available to monitor the performance, once you have this hyperconverged EUC cluster running, and what sort of tools do you use to size the cluster to begin with?
Yes, so for sizing, the biggest thing is understanding what the actual users are doing, understanding their workflow, their performance over a certain period of time, not just taking snapshots of what CPU was here or RAM was there. You really want to get a good picture, try to get at least 7 days up to 30 days. And there's tools out there on the market. Lookware has an assessment tool that will get in-guess metrics. Lakeside has an in-guess tool that will do metrics as well, show you what exactly they're doing, use how they're using the RAM, what applications are using that. Will GPUs help you get those profiles for GPUs, other tools like GPU Sizer and GPU Profile as well. And then we also have our own tools that we can use where we can pull that data and then feed it into a tool that we call Sizer. And inside of Sizer, we can kind of help fit you to the right hardware, the right number of users on that hardware, and be able to help you right size those solutions.
I'm curious, on the human side of this, do you feel like when you say take away someone's laptop or desktop and replace it with a thin client device, do you feel like suddenly performance is scrutinized much more than it ever was before in the past, and therefore you would even need these tools to kind of provide feedback and proof, in essence, that yes, the EUC environment is performing as it should?
Yes, because Case mentioned a key word earlier about locality. So when we're having a desktop, a one-to-one user, or a laptop, they're having all that performance right there, and that's all for them. So when we're taking a user from that local device and moving them into a EUC solution, that performance has to be the same or better, or you're going to have a bad user experience issue and possibly a career-changing moment.
I like that, career-changing moment. That sounds bad. I'm curious, what operating system are we talking about here? What have you seen? Are you talking about Windows 10 or what?
So it used to be a lot with, first, Windows XP, then Windows 7, then possibly some Windows 8 versions. But the bulk of it today is users going to Windows 10. And even within Windows 10, Windows 10 itself did introduce some performance differences from the past. And then every time there's an update to Windows 10, there could be additional performance things that need to be looked at, performance optimizations, things that can impact performance. So every time there's a new operating system or a new update or release of the same operating system, we have to go back and make sure we're looking at that to make sure there is no change in performance to cause any kind of issue with the end users.
And does Windows 10 require more resources than past operating systems?
Yes, from our testing, we're seeing an uptake in requirements for performance, not just from Windows 10, but also Office versions as well. So when you're going from Windows 7 to Windows 10, there's impact there. And then going from, say, Office 2013 to Office 2016, there's even more impact there. So every time there's a newer operating system, possibly newer application versions, there's always some kind of performance impact that we have to take in account for when sizing and also when looking at end users.
And I'll direct this question to Brian. Brian, I'm curious. I mean, we talked about the importance of storage in a EUC or VDI environment. What is it that about hyperconvergence versus, say, a traditional SAN or NAS that improves the EUC experience or the performance of it?
Yeah, certainly. I'll take that one. But before I start on that, just to kind of wrap up the tools perspective, right? So Jarian was talking about the tool set used in kind of the sizing and data gathering piece. And then, once you've got it deployed, right, there's a kind of an additional tool set that you might, look at to investigate to kind of maintain the ongoing experience. And as part of our platform, we have a Prism Pro product, which helps you do the capacity planning, helps you find waste and do right sizing in there, right? So as you look to scale your environment, you can model what it looks like to add additional users to your clusters, and then understand whether you have enough capacity in the cluster as it sits, or if you potentially need to add some additional nodes or storage or CPU memory type resources to the cluster to handle those. And then ability to define waste, right? So understand if your server VMs or your desktop VMs are oversized or undersized. And then also, we have built-in learning behavior so that you understand, what's going on in the VMs, whether that's normal or if it's an abnormal, and then we automatically, alert you on those abnormal behaviors. And then kind of we flip over to the question you asked about, why HCI is great for it. Well, I think it's great for a number of reasons, right? If we kind of roll back to the locality thing that both the other guys have mentioned already, that that's a kind of a cornerstone feature of Nutanix is the data locality piece. It works great in pretty much all workloads, but why it's great, for end user computing, is that all the data, whenever users are reading their data, whether it's their files, or launching an application, or even just the VM is starting up from Windows, right? It's gathering that data locally from the node, rather than having to transverse across the network to another node or another shared storage device. So you always get that local performance, and then that kind of ties into the HCI story of how it scales, right? So you can buy a couple of nodes and start small, and then as you scale, your environment and you want to add nodes, that user experience scales, the exact same, right? So we're going to perform, excellent with 3 nodes, but as you scale your environment to 20, 30, and hundreds of nodes, we still perform the same way because of that locality piece. So it's really, critical of piece of why our story and why we're providing a great user experience at scale.
So why don't we move on and talk about GPUs? For those out there in the audience, I mean, most everyone has heard of a GPU, surely. But let's talk for a minute about why GPUs are so important when it comes to performance with an EUC environment. Case, you want to take that?
Sure. So what we've seen in our testing, like Jarian was talking about, is that different operating systems will have different requirements. And we saw a massive difference from moving on from Windows 7 to Windows 10. But as he already explained, we saw differences in Windows 10 releases just as well. So we saw 1709, which is a specific Windows 10 release, act very different than 1903, for example. Having that being said, and with that release cycle that Microsoft has introduced, it kind of forces people into a regular cadence of updates. It doesn't always mean that the kit you have today will be able to run the workload you'll have tomorrow. So there's a constant kind of adjustment in the resources needed versus the application landscape you're running, or the Windows operating system, or the Office version. So what we've seen is there's a report, and that's something that we'll see in the next slide. There's a report created by Lakeside that has a module that can monitor OpenGL, WebGL, and DirectX calls from the operating system or the application landscape to the operating system. And what they discovered in that research is that applications, as they grow, as they mature, as they come out with new versions, are requiring much more resources from the local VM or from the VM to actually perform similar. So what they've seen in their research is that Google Chrome had an uptick of 36% in terms of calls that could leverage a GPU inside. And obviously moving up, you would expect that a GPU, and that's basically the stigma that we've been hearing a lot, is that GPUs are for high-end workloads, for the SALT, for CAD/CAM workloads, for high-end engineering. But if we look at the stack that we're displaying on this slide right now, this has nothing to do with high-end engineering. I think that maybe 99% of the configurations I work with, or I propose, or my customers are working with, have these applications installed. Microsoft Outlook, Excel, PowerPoint. These are quite common applications. And if you see the uptick in resource needs that they need, then obviously it's a sign that adding a GPU would add to user experience and user perceived performance of those desktops. So definitely we see a increased need of adding GPUs inside of the virtual desktops. And if we look at what end users reported back to the Lakeside report, is that you don't always necessarily need a GPU. Without a GPU, user performance is qualified as fair. Some would say good enough. But if you have the additional budget to spend and you're aiming for excellent end user experience, then adding a GPU, as shown in this report by Lakeside, would shift the end user experience or the end user perceived performance from fair or good enough to excellent, which is a major leap, but it's also a sign of end user trust and end user confidence in the performance of their desktop being a worthy replacement of their maybe physical desktops that they had for ages. So adding that GPU measured with this Lakeside report adds to the acceptance of your end user computing projects. Maybe, Jordan, do you want to talk about like moments where you could introduce GPUs in your cycle or in your refresh cycle of the customers?
Yeah, so one of the biggest thing here when introducing GPUs, we talked about operating system versions earlier. So maybe when you're looking at changing operating systems from a previous version, Windows 7 up to Windows 10, in that EUC upgrade cycle, that's when you might look at go ahead and introducing GPUs into your infrastructure. The other thing, too, is looking at that land and expand, right? So looking at the application. So you may have certain use cases, engineering, design, those type of departments, use cases, to where you can introduce those for those use cases. And then once you have that successfully deployed, then start looking at expanding that to other use cases in the infrastructure. One of the main thing is that, yes, GPUs can be used for almost every application going forward, but let's start with certain use cases that we know that really can take advantage of GPUs and really help those use cases shine, and then look at adding GPUs for other use cases as we grow out into our environments.
And now let me interrupt here just for a second, if you don't mind. I got a question from the audience. They're asking, when we talk about GPUs, are we talking about installing physical GPUs into each of the VDI hosts?
Yes, we are. So we're talking about certain cards that we have from NVIDIA, where depending on the actual hardware type, we can have 2 to 3 GPU cards, and depending on the model of those cards, we can have a certain amount of users per node. So we actually are taking physical server-grade GPU cards, not the actual workstation kind, not the ones that we go and build a gaming PC with, but certain server model types that we actually install into those servers to help those GPU use cases.
Okay, and are we able to, in some way, pool the virtual machines that have the GPUs versus virtual machines that don't? I mean, so we could create a pool or group of engineering users, for example, and they get the GPUs, and the standard office users, maybe they don't need them or we can't afford them at this time, and they don't. Is there some way to separate that?
Yes, usually with the brokers used on top of that, we'll create different types of published resources for those use cases. So we will create certain certain pools of desktops for the graphics use case, and assign those to the graphics-based users, and then create separate pool of desktops for the non-GPU use cases, like the standard office users or the standard use cases.
Okay, and what about the end client devices? Are there different performance levels of those end user devices who are viewing these remote desktops? Does that make a difference?
Brian, do you want to take that question?
Sure, certainly. Yeah, it does potentially make a difference, right? Broker and ultimately the protocol you're choosing, but you will see some difference in the power of the end point device that you use. But that also kind of plays into whether you're using GPU or not, right? So if you're not using GPU, then potentially offloading, some of those graphical intense operations to a more powerful endpoint is helpful in those aspects.
Another key point there to add too is multi-monitor resolution and that type of stuff too as well when using the graphics cards. Especially when we're talking to those high-end design engineering use cases as well. So that can be taken into account for thin clients also.
So what I'm hearing you say is that GPUs aren't just for people who are running, say, AutoCAD or engineering applications. GPUs are becoming more and more necessary for people who are just running like Microsoft Office, or in some cases, even just surfing the web, going to a major sports site or news site these days, or watching videos on YouTube through their thin client device. GPUs are becoming more and more necessary for just about any type of application. Is that true?
We definitely see an additional benefit of using GPUs in more regular focused desktops. Like you said, just watching a YouTube video can be offloaded to a GPU, which basically offloads the CPU and gives a better balance into resource consumption across that host. Obviously, with your investment into a Nutanix and NVIDIA grid technology, you'd be able to offer them both. So you could have a chunk of resources from that GPU pool assigned to your high-end engineering workforce, or you could have, you can have a chunk of resources that you assign to a task worker or a knowledge worker, if you like, and have them have a GPU-enabled desktop, but more specific to their jobs. So in general, what we see is that those task worker, knowledge worker profiles can have a higher density per card, per board, with just slightly less capabilities in terms of resources. Or you could have a less dense board, but with more resources to your end user, and thus have a better performance when it's a high-end engineering developer or any of those use cases that require more resources. Key element here for me, and again, Brian, Jarian, feel free to add if you'd like. Key element here is measure resource consumption. Jarian already talked about GPU Profiler, GPU Sizer, and Lakeside, and ControlUp. They all have fabulous tools to actually measure the resource consumption of your desktop. I've seen a lot of cases where people are trying to match their current GPU into a virtual GPU. That doesn't always work the way as expected because of generation differences, maybe feature set differences. So I would always recommend to measure the actual resource consumption of your end user on that workstation or that PC or maybe that virtual desktop to make sure that we're matching the expectation towards their new desktops or their new end user computing environment. So measuring and having the data is key to a successful implementation of your GPUs or end user computing environment.
And here on the screen, we see NVIDIA Grid and NVIDIA Quattro. Can you compare the difference between these? Are these software licenses? Are these different GPU cards you put in the host?
No, these are the license types that NVIDIA has. And they divided them into two buckets, PC users and workstation users. Workstation users are the higher end developers or engineers that require a little bit more, let's say, resources. That's where you would see the Quadro Virtual Data Center Workstation license. It comes with a couple of features within the licenses that enable you to have more resources or higher resolutions or different screen setups. Whereas PC users would typically see the NVIDIA Grid Virtual Apps license or the NVIDIA Grid Virtual PC license. It's just a way of licensing. There's a different cost model to each of them. And again, depending on your use cases, you could select either one of them or maybe have a combination of these users with different licensing types and making sure that you offer the right license, the right solution to the right user.
So let's move on. Let's talk about some use cases. I mean, out there in the real world, how are real companies using EUC, hyperconvergence, and GPU together? Let's start with the oil and gas use case.
Yeah, well, what I've seen in oil and gas is companies that are using Nutanix and user computing technologies and NVIDIA Grid to measure potential earthquakes or measure potential oil winnings or gas winnings. We've got a local company here in the Netherlands where I'm based that is using this exact same stack to measure the probabilities that when they go out and search for natural resources like gas, that they'll find them in the spots where they're actually drilling into the ocean. So having that stack enables them to have a better chance or a better, they actually have the data to consider where they're going to look for these natural resources. So the likelihood of them being successful of gathering these natural resources went up with a reasonable amount. Maybe Jarian, you can talk about the media and entertainment vertical.
Yes, so for media and entertainment vertical with Nutanix and GPUs, what we see there is for video editing and composing. So being able to have that performance, to be able to create any video, edit any video that was previously shot, and those type of use cases, to be able to take advantage of that, to have that high performance and make sure that there's no issues when delivering or editing video with GPUs and Nutanix.
Given the fact that we've got 3 Nutanix employees on this webinar, Brian, could you take the last one?
Yep, certainly. So in manufacturing, there's going to be, pretty wide breadth, right? So, these could be like auto, companies, designing parts or cars or, any type of manufacturing where they need to do some type of engineering work. And there's quite a few engineering apps, right, where they are potentially doing, blueprints or, architectural diagrams on some part or some widget that they're making. And there's a lot of applications like that. CATIA is a, very popular one, in drafting. There's like AutoCAD. So there's a number of those. And these kind of fit the big resource requirement engineering that are kind of a slam dunk, for the GPU type requirements.
So GPUs help in a lot of different use cases. But I'm betting they help just really any company who has the Office applications that we talked about. I mean, is that right, Case?
Yes, you're absolutely spot on. So having a GPU, regardless of your use case, will impact a user experience in a good way. We saw that from the report from Lakeside. We saw that very traditional, very common applications like Chrome, like Firefox, like the Office suite are requiring more and more resources, and they can leverage that GPU if it's inside to offload from a CPU and onload that to the GPU, which by itself means that we're using the right resources for the right tasks. And with that, we're enhancing user experience across the board. So no matter if you're just a very basic task worker, knowledge worker, or that high-end engineer developer, that whole spectrum can be delivered with NVIDIA Grid technologies running on Nutanix Hyperconverged infrastructure.
And I understand we've got a case study for download right there in the handout section in the GoToWebinar control panel. So if you're interested in learning more about a specific use case with EUC, hyperconvergence, and GPUs, make sure you check that out. So we've got a lot of good questions coming in here from the audience, and it's time for Q&A. Let's see, first question that came in here, if I were to summarize it, I would say they're asking about the different components that kind of make all this work. I mean, we covered a number of different acronyms. And so, Case, maybe you want to take this one. I mean, we've got obviously physical hosts, we've got end user devices, but what are all the other pieces kind of in between that make this solution we're talking about work?
Wow, that's a good question. Obviously, and this is my personal opinion, right? The main focus in any end user computing environment or project that you have to kick off is the end user itself, right? So start with that and then work your way up versus doing the other way around. A lot of the projects that I've seen failing were from a data center perspective towards the end user. And I'm a big advocate of turning that around and start with the end user. Go to their work spot, have a look around, see how they're operating their devices, see what they're doing, how their process works, how their day flows, and move on with that. So, very simplistic. It starts with the end user. It has endpoint devices. Could be a mobile phone, could be a tablet, could be a thin client, could be a laptop. If you're not showing up on premises with that end user, you don't know what they're using, know their additional devices. Are they using a trackpad? Are they using a mouse? Are they using a specialized mouse? These are the things that will impact user experience as well. And then it's more, what kind of screens are they using? What's the resolution? How much bandwidth do we have on site? How much bandwidth do we have in the network on the data center side? And then we move up. Do we want remote access? Do we want secure remote access? Do we want scanning on that remote access? How do we want to provide them the authentication methods? Do we want to use two-factor authentication or not? Personally, I would say that that's not a question. That is more, if we're going to do two-factor authentication, how are we going to deliver that? Because two-factor authentication should not be a question anymore. So moving on, remote access, scanning, authentication, and then it's what kind of broker do we want? Which policies do we want to set? What's the user experience that we want to deliver? Again, all of these questions come with additional tool sets or additional support from our field teams that we can help you with. But there's a long range and a wide range of questions and steps you have to fulfill to be able to deliver that successful end-user computing environment. And the further we can simplify that from an end-user computing perspective with Nutanix hyperconverged infrastructure, the better it is, because you can focus on these questions instead of worrying about storage upgrades and forklift upgrades along the way.
One thing I can't stress enough that Case said is that understanding that user's workflow is the key to everything, because at the end of the day, the end game, the end goal is that user experience. So understanding the workflow and giving them that same or better experience as they're moved into these environments, that is the key right there.
Another question here is about the hypervisor. Are we talking about Nutanix AHV or vSphere?
Sure, I'll take that one. I mean, ultimately, it's a choice, right? Nutanix is great at providing choice to the customers and to the consultants that are deploying it. That might more depend upon, ultimately the broker that you're running, right? If you choose VMware Horizon, it just supports, VMware vSphere, but a Citrix environment is a bit more flexible, right? So it could be either. And we certainly see, overwhelmingly adoption of AHV as a hypervisor from our Citrix clients, right? They're really choosing it for a number of factors, right? The simplicity in design and deployment and operations and the security, and it's just, makes a great partner for Citrix on that.
Okay, so I can choose my hypervisor, I can choose my broker. Another question here is about tuning storage. Jarian, is there something special that you do with the Nutanix hyperconverged storage to tune it for VDI, or is it just compatible and high performance out of the box?
From the performance standpoint, and with some of our technology, things like data locality that we talked about earlier, we're doing things with instant clones or link clones or machine creation services, doing that snapshot-like copy of those desktops where we actually are able to, notice that there's access to that and make that a data localization type access to that copy. That's just built into our software. Our software is already high performance and very tuned for EUC use cases. So using those things like shadow clones and data locality, and also to how we do our storage, whether it's a hybrid, which we see majority of success on hybrid. We do have some customers that go to all flash, but just with our software on top of your different hardware of choice for manufacturers, we're already tuned for performance.
And Brian, I'll hand this question to you. They're asking about, is there some sort of blueprint for implementing VDI with Nutanix? And as part of that blueprint, is there some guidance on selecting the hardware nodes? Do I need to have a hybrid node or an all-flash node? How do I know?
Yeah, certainly, right. So again, that's part of the flexibility piece, right? We provide hybrid options, we provide all-flash options. We even allow you to mix those in a same cluster if that's what your requirements would lead you to, right? But ultimately, it's a mixture of gather your requirements, feed them into our sizer, and work with our field teams, and they will guide you on which what's the proper configuration, and then part of that configuration is which node type, which is mostly going to basically be driven whether you don't need GPUs and you like density. So we have node models that have multiple units in a single chassis, Or if you do have the GPU need, then we would look at the density, right? So whether you need like nodes with 1 GPU or 2 or 3 in a single chassis, those types of decisions, right? But that's where Sizer excels, right? Because you really feed in your requirements, and then ultimately it spits out a configuration based upon all the hard work and testing that the engineering and field teams have done in the background. Just kind of wrap that up, right? As we've published very detailed reference architectures, for the different brokers, both Horizon and Citrix, and all the different combinations that they work with the different hypervisors to allow a blueprint for you to start from.
Excellent. And I think we covered this already, but to kind of reiterate it, and since it's related to that question about the reference architecture and blueprint, is there some way to know how many desktops I can get per host?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, kind of put on the consultant hat is it really, it depends, right? There could be a number of pieces that could be the constraining factor, right? So let's just, since we've been talking a lot about GPUs, right? So as part of the information gathering of requirements, that will ultimately lead you to what size GPU profile that you're going to have or be required to use, and then the card that you select, right? And then the node that you select will tell you how many, cards you can fit in that node, and then the combination of the card and the number of them and the profile will tell you, can I fit 64 users or 96 users, etc., in that node. So when you have GPU, typically GPU is potentially your most constraining factor, and then after that, it's really a CPU and memory combination, right? So you pick a node. And then based upon how much CPU your users are using, that may be the constraining factor. Or if you don't use a lot of CPU, then probably the last piece would be memory, right? So you see a lot of differences, right? GPU can be the most constrained. Others where they're using Windows 10 and maybe it's like a government agency that uses a lot of security agents, so they have a lot of high CPU usage. That's probably your most constraining factor.
Excellent. And then, Jarian, there's a question here about Spectre and Meltdown. How do I know if my Nutanix environment is susceptible to that? Do I need to take some special action to mitigate that?
Yeah, so there's patches on the desktop side for Windows, and there's patches on the hypervisor as well. So in our team, myself and Case and another team member, Sven, we've done testing on that to see what the impact is, and then also have released patches to help with some of the impact of that as well.
Excellent. And then I know we're running out of time here, so I'll throw this final question to you, Case. If somebody wanted to get started with Nutanix and EUC and GPUs, I mean, what do you recommend? What's the first step?
Multiple ways. Obviously, contacting our field teams would be the right way to gather as much information as you can. There are multiple blogs out there, next.nutanix.com. Also, Brian, Jarian, and myself are maintainers or writers, authors on our own blogs. There's Community Edition, Nutanix Community Edition, which you can install. You can download that and install it on basically any piece of hardware you can find. A lot of people are running that on Intel NUCs, which are an easy, accessible, relatively inexpensive way of running Nutanix CE on premises as a test box or home lab kind of environment. That Nutanix CE is fully usable with the Citrix plugins that we have available. So if you want to play around with Nutanix AHV and Citrix Zen Desktop or Zen App, Community Edition is a great way of spending some time and getting up to speed in terms of the additional benefits that Nutanix AHV has with your end-user computing environment.
All right. Well, this has been a really great webinar. I'm afraid that's all the time we have. I've learned a lot. I know the audience has too. Jarian, Brian, Case, and Kong from Nutanix, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you everyone out there in the audience for taking time out of your day to join us. For more information on the Nutanix solution, of course, visit Nutanix.com. And the winner of today's $300 Tango gift card is Dawn Lewis of Idaho. Congratulations, Dawn Lewis of Idaho. We'll reach out to deliver your gift card. Thank you, everyone who joined us on today's event. Look forward to having you on the next event from Actual Tech Media. Of course, for more information on hyperconvergence, make sure you visit Nutanix.com. Have a great day. Bye-bye.